So hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, Sexual Violence and COVID-19, Navigating Our Way Back to an Unsafe World. We're thrilled that so many folks have been able to join us to be part of this conversation this evening. My name is Dahlia Israel and I'm the very fortunate person that gets to be the Executive Director at WAVAW Rape Crisis Center. I'll be our moderator this evening, and I'm excited to be joined by a group of amazing humans that I and WAVAW have had the privilege of knowing and being in relationship with for many years. Our panel is comprised of WAVAW staff, past and present, volunteers, past and present, practicum students, and vital community partners. Creating intentional community when you're doing this work to support survivors and shift society is vital for our survival, and I'm grateful for each one of you for joining us tonight. I want to also acknowledge that I'm coming to you this evening from the unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam people, and that WAVAW operates on the ancestral unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. And we express gratitude to the Indigenous people of Turtle Island who have cared for these lands since time immemorial and face the ongoing systemic oppression of colonial violence and continue to resist and show strength and resilience. And WAVAW is honored to serve trans, non-binary, and two-spirit survivors of sexualized violence on these lands. So I wanted to go over some logistics before we get started. I obviously am new to Zoom webinars. So thank you for those that joined us early for our candid conversation. We won't be having question and answer during the webinar. I will keep track of any questions that pop up, and we will make sure also, we've made sure that a survey is going to go out directly after the webinar. So if there are particular questions or themes that didn't get answered, please feel free to fill out the survey and we will do our best to get to those pieces. The crisis line is available for emotional support. If you find something in this conversation triggering or you're needing to connect with someone, the crisis line the number is available on our website and it's available during this time. As I mentioned, the webinar will be recorded and shared on WAVAW platforms in the coming days. And I just wanted to share a little bit about the intention of the panel this evening. So first of all, I want to give a big shout out to Louisa Espina and Son Min Bong for not only dreaming of this webinar with me, but making it happen. So thank you both. They may or may not be in the audience. So today is the last day of our summer campaign this year. Due to COVID, our annual fundraiser was canceled, the Scotiabank Charity Challenge. And that was super scary in the early days. We were agile and flexible and switched gears pretty quickly to launch our Champions for Survivors campaign. And so we really wanted to wrap this campaign in a way that amplified our community and highlighted WAVAW's staff, alumni, and friends that have been Champions for Survivors for years and who do the heavy lifting and the work of shifting society. So in the spirit of shifting society, we hope that you will listen, that you will learn and walk away with some new pieces of learning that will validate you and or inspire you to think and act in different ways. So much has happened in the world over the past 3 months. It's been an incredible 3 months. When I think about March 13th being the day that COVID was named a worldwide pandemic, it feels like yesterday, but it also feels like a lifetime ago. And although COVID has prompted the most significant response or adaptation or action in our immediate lives that we've seen in recent times, we know that we've been facing multiple pandemics for years. The ongoing colonial project, white supremacy, sexual violence, to just name a few. The responses to these incredible pressing issues have been incredible. From Stonewall to Black Lives Matter to Idle No More to Me Too to the attention that Indigenous folks in Canada have drawn to the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. They've been inspiring, they've been painful, and they've built momentum, but COVID halted life for many of us. COVID certainly has been experienced differently depending on social location and identity. And although we talk about survivors a lot at WAVAW, we acknowledge that there's no monolith experience of survivorhood. So hearing about the nuances that different communities of survivors face is absolutely integral to shifting society and will be at the heart of the conversation that we have tonight. Overarching themes that we will also have the opportunity to think about tonight are about notions of safety. What does safety actually look like? How and who gets to access and feel safe in public and in private space? And what is actually required to create safety for survivors? So we're just about ready to start. I'd like now to pass it over to Priscilla to open us in a good way. Thank you, Priscilla.
Thank you. Yes. Welcome everyone, and to the fellow panelists as well. And thank you to WAVAW for creating this space for us to be in today. Ait Squall, which is good day in Halkomina. So I am from Sartlip First Nation, which is on Vancouver Island. So it's starting us in a good way when some people ask for a land acknowledgement. I would like to give a bit of background and context for some people who've had questions about what they are, what they mean, and having them be a formal statement and respect Indigenous people as traditional stewards of the land, and enduring relationship that's existed between Indigenous people and the traditional territories. So it's to recognize the land as an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory that we reside on, in a way of honoring the Indigenous people who've lived here and worked here for land for time immemorial. It's important to understand the long-standing history that has brought you to reside here on the land and to seek understanding of your place within that history. So land acknowledgements do not exist in past tense or historical context. The colonialism is current and it's an ongoing process. Land acknowledgements are also worth noting that it is a part of a traditional protocol for like myself as a First Nations. When we go from ceremony to ceremony in different communities, we would have welcoming ceremonies. So if you've seen a canoe race, you would see when we arrive on the waters, we don't actually touch the land until we are welcomed and until we have recognized that we are a visitor on that territory. Land acknowledgements are also important in recognizing the attempted genocide of Indigenous people, which has spanned centuries. So for some, they may seem like an inadequate gesture, but for me, I see it as a way of building on truth and reconciliation, because how could you have reconciliation without that truth? So it's a reminder to not only acknowledge the territory as unceded, as Dahlia had mentioned, unceded meaning legally not signed away to Canada or the Crown. So this is something that has been taken. And so we're acknowledging the injustices that have been carried out against Indigenous communities, such as broken treaties against Indigenous communities, residential schools, the 60s scoop, and continued attempts by government, being federal, provincial, and territorial, and religious groups to control the Indigenous family unit. So it isn't just a historical problem, it's key for us when we're trying to grapple why land acknowledgements are important today and what that means for generations of Canadians who are affected and not just the oppressed. They're also about not placing blame. It's important to understand that when you're doing it with good intention and you're not doing it sloppily and you're doing it in a way that is being mindful of the things that I've just mentioned, that that will help also with truth and reconciliation when you're coming from it in a good place. So the point is in acknowledging the systemic and institutional powers of oppression towards Indigenous people. And let's see. The other part I wasn't sure if I was going to mention, which is why I said let's see, is that I've had some Indigenous friends and family talk about when some people do acknowledgements, they talk about live, work, and play, and how they have a problem with the word play because they say, I don't have the right to play on my own territory. I don't have access to education, clean water, good roads. How are these other people able to say, we're here and we're able to play? But for me, I feel like that's important to this conversation because we're also talking about power and privilege. And I feel like people have privilege to play on our territories that some of us don't even have. And so keeping that in mind when we're moving forward with our discussion about privilege. And so how we're going to be using it. So when we're going through talking about sexism and ableism and, gender bias, discrimination, what is it that you're doing to address these issues in society today? And taking a look at that from a decolonial perspective, taking a look at that from an Indigenous lens as well, and seeing what we could do to break down all of the injustices and how they intersect with each other. So we all have a role and responsibility to call on community, police, and government to provide justice for our murdered and missing Indigenous women, for justice for Chantel Moore and her family, and justice for all of the health and safety of our Indigenous women and girls, because Black lives matter and Indigenous lives matter. So that is where I'm hoping we're going to start off today and close off in a good way, in saying, this is our information and how are we going to put that into now action, right? And he'ewith, which means goodbye. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Priscilla. Okay, so we have an amazing group of panelists. Their full bios are on the event page on Facebook, and I'll invite you to check out their full bios. As we start, I'm going to invite each of our panelists, when they answer the question, that they introduce themselves with their names, their pronouns, and whose voice they're bringing or amplifying here tonight. So we've got about an hour and 45 minutes. We've got 7 brilliant minds. I'm going to launch us into our first question, and we're hoping that this creates a bit of an opportunity for a conversation. So we're hoping that the questions will kind of ebb and flow into each other, and I will do my best to move us along and find segues to move us into our next question. But Priscilla, I'll start with you, and the question that we're going to start with is public space. Public space and access to safety within it has always been a contested reality for survivors. When COVID hit, those of us who could were asked to stay home as much as possible. From your position or vantage point, how did access to safety change or stay the same for survivors during phase 1 of COVID? And what opportunities do we have as we move into phase 2 and phase 3?
Thank you. Let's see. Well, again, yes, Priscilla, my pronouns are she, her, hers. And where I'm coming from today is from, and hopefully representing, my family. So taking a look at, some of the stories I'll be sharing would be coming from my mom, my grandmother. So, for us growing up, what that was like, being intergenerational survivors of, residential school and domestic violence and abuse. So I'm hoping to amplify a bit of that. And so that said, I think that when it comes to safe spaces, it's been very hard for many Indigenous and people of color, I think, to find safe spaces to be in. You take a look at what's happened with even a young girl trying to open a bank account, right? You take a look at what it's like for us when we are in the ER right now, and what's come out of, us accessing healthcare, and in the education system, in so much. I'm just trying to think of what it's like for families that I've worked with MCFD, having worked with a lot of Indigenous parents and being in those spaces and trying to parent and trying to have access to your children and being able to build that bond and relationship with them. And how COVID has impacted that and being able to have that safety. I think it has 2 consequences. One is that it has not really changed much for us because of the way the colonial system is set up. We do already feel very unsafe in many spaces. But I think that it's also amplified a bit of the racism that's happening in our community right now, where we do have a young Indigenous woman who was, you know, physically assaulted because someone had assumed that she was of a different ethnic background. And so that in itself is just trying to walk down the street. What that looks like for us right now is completely unsafe, and already on top of the layers of us feeling unsafe as it was as young Indigenous women trying to walk down the street. Yeah.
Thank you. Our next, we've got a speakers list that I will just invite people to, and then we're going to reverse it when we go into our second question. So Mabrat.
Thanks, Dahlia, and hello, everybody. It's good to see all the fellow panelists, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. I go by she, her, hers, and I am an uninvited settler to these lands, and my family are uninvited settlers to land now known as Canada, and our family settled in Ganawage territory, south shore of the St. Lawrence River, what's now known as south shore of Montreal. And I'm the executive director of WISH Drop-In Center Society, and we're really close partners with WAVAW, and really honored to have them work with us both inside the drop-in and in all the advocacy work that we do. So in terms of, Dahlia, in terms of your question about what voices, I think two, if you'll allow me, is those of street-based sex workers and amplifying, well, first their reality, which is often quite hidden and deeply stigmatized. And then secondly, those in my deeply extended Black communities back home and here. And in these times, I find myself thinking about those folks that I have worked in solidarity with and activism work 25 plus years, and all of us are sort of spread out across the continent. So I'm thinking about each of them as well. In terms of public space and access to safety, as an organization that supports street-based sex workers, where street-based sex work is the most dangerous form, but it's also the visible form. It might only make up between 5 to 20% of the full scope of what the sex trade looks like, but it's the form that has the least amount of choice and the highest amount of danger. So pre-COVID was already a scenario that put folks in tremendous vulnerability and danger. And since we're operating in the downtown east side, we're also talking about poverty. We're talking about mental health issues. We're talking about lack of housing. And we're also talking about what it looks like for gendered violence, gender-based violence, and male violence against women in particular, when they're coming to neighborhoods like the downtown east side to act out violence with impunity, and are able to get away with it because of our collective failures to address violence against women, and to our collective failure to address the intersection of what if that person who is trading sex is also Black, or is also gender variant, or is also Black woman, and what if all of the above, and the amount of stigma and hate and aggression that is played out on that community is just is overwhelming. And so I think about the fact that right now, for these communities, we're not dealing with COVID positive results. We're dealing with a deep exacerbation of pre-existing stigma, pre-existing targeted violence that has now heightened. And we're dealing with a complete loss of income and inability to secure emergency income, which now means we have an entire community of people that are resorting to sex work, returning to sex work, and some who are doing so for the first time ever, which is incredibly risky, and within a new level of desperation that that predators are definitely taking advantage of. So when we think about public space and when we think about somebody like a street-based sex worker that is simultaneously quite visible and also very invisible. And what is our responsibility to, like, what does public safety look like? What does public safety look like in the context of people who need to secure income, one way or the other? What does public safety look like in the context of poverty and conversations like guaranteed income and secure housing and affordable housing that may dramatically affect people's decisions or lack of decisions around how they earn their income? And then lastly, it's not really lastly, there's quite a number of things that we could cover, but the other piece that I wanted to highlight in terms of public space is for Black and Indigenous folks and people of color, our mere existence in a nation that is, you know, where white supremacy is all around us, our mere existence is political. And, you know, in the Black community, we definitely talk about walking while Black, shopping while Black, driving while Black, and what it looks like for us to be in public spaces, and that in and of itself could turn dangerous in a moment, is something that people of color, immigrants, who are like visibly people of color, Black folks, Indigenous folks, we know this from childhood. We're all taught things like, don't put your hands in your pockets when you go into stores, put that hoodie down, pay attention to what you're picking up, make sure you don't look like a suspect. And there are entire communities that never, ever, ever have to experience that, never have to walk through supposedly safe public spaces in that way. So I think about that now. I think about the impact of COVID and how the rest of the communities are now thinking about public safety in a very different way, but other communities have been dealing with this forever. So yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks, Dahlia.
Thanks, Margaret. Stacy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stacy. I use she, her pronouns. I grew up a settler and spent most of shelter in place actually in my hometown on Nuu-chah-nulth territories on Vancouver Island. I am one half of the co-founders of a project in town called Good Night Out. We are a young organization that particularly seeks to help amplify the voices of young women and marginalized genders and queer women in particular, their experience of safety while in public. And so those are the voices I always try to amplify. I think that in particular today, we work a lot in the music community, and the past 48 hours have been a time with some survivors coming forward, and I'm not going to amplify their voices, but I do want to amplify their value and channel their bravery for the next couple hours as we move into this discussion. So the question about public space, I think that if home is a safe place for you, then isolation or shelter in place was a respite. You could settle in with your bubble and potentially feel really safe, and people weren't forced to navigate some of the identity or the power-based violence that comes with their day-to-day life. I know with Good Night Out, we kind of become a sounding board or a space for disclosures, particularly around incidents of harassment or public space violence that happens while young adults go about their day, whether it's at a restaurant or a nightclub. And so, of course, for the past 3 months, those have ground to a halt. So what that tells us is that for a moment, some people, some members of our community, they got a break. They weren't working, they didn't have to deal with workplace harassment. But we know that that wasn't the case for everyone. A significant amount of our community had to work. Many of those jobs that are deemed essential are workers who are racialized or otherwise coming from equity-seeking communities. And we also know that support groups or even just day-to-day connections that survivors rely on to get through their day or to get through school, many of them closed. And so my biggest takeaway really is that for all of us who work in particularly feminist anti-violence group or anti-racism type of work, is that our work isn't done. If the pandemic puts parts of our community at more risk of sexual violence or gender-based violence or more re-traumatization due to inequities, there's still so much work that needs to be done. To think forward facing and think about opportunities, I think that many industries have had to pivot lately to be able to deliver their services or to reopen. And I see this as such a huge opportunity to bake in more equitable delivery and models of business and interacting with each other into their response to opening. We know that people right now are primed to keep safety at the forefront of their mind. And so what better time to really extend that definition of safety if you're already putting this effort in.
Thank you, Stacey. Okay, over to you, Ariana.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so my name is Ariana Bear, and I worked at WAVAW for many amazing years. Miss it every day. And now I'm working with another amazing team over at UBC at the Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Office. I'm actually returning to UBC. I was a student there in grad school many years ago in my early days at WAVAW, writing about grassroots feminist activism around sexual violence and the ways that communities come together and disrupt business as usual, particularly the ways that mainstream media and police and the legal system tend to talk about sexual violence and who's responsible for preventing it. And really challenging that and the ways that we center always police as authority instead of survivors and activists and people in our field who've been doing this work for a long time. So it's interesting to come back there and be a part of this new office, bringing all of my WAVAW years and amazing connections from there with me. So I'm really happy to be a part of this panel and very humbled by the group that's gathered here. Some of the things that noticing on campus, kind of as has been said, is that a lot of the kind of public events that would normally be happening have not happened. So a lot of the parties and events, spaces where we know harm has happened historically at really high rates, didn't happen at the end of term and won't be happening at the start of the school year this fall. Time in classrooms and labs, at work and on transit aren't happening. And those are all opportunities where harassment and criminal harassment and other things can normally be taking place. And so people's experiences of safety and has shifted. And for some, home has been the only place that's felt safe after assault. And at the same time, many folks have now had to go and reside with unsafe people. And we've seen a lot of students in particular have been displaced back to unsupportive or unsafe home communities, both locally and globally. So we've seen a lot of impacts on mental health due to isolation. And of course, we know that being a survivor can already be so isolating. Rape culture tells us we're alone. We're the only people that have experienced this. No one will understand. It was our fault, all of those things, which are of course false. And so isolation can really build on that. And also so much has moved to online spaces where of course all the intersections of oppression also continue to play out in those spaces as public spaces as well. Some of the things that we've also seen have been disruptions in our work and pathways to healing and justice alongside survivors. So we were in the midst of community healing work that survivors had asked for within a faculty where there was a lot of hurt and harm going back years. And the ability to gather online is incredible, but it's not the same. And being able to do sort of what folks are calling asynchronous online courses, so meeting people take it at different times, it's not something that people are coming together to do. Those can be great introduction, but they cannot replace the impact of in-person experiences when it comes to this kind of education where we're asking people to have a paradigm shift connect with social justice, do relationship building, and ask people to take very real social risks in trying something new, intervening in harm, and really trying to change entrenched traditions within their communities. So we've seen changes there. And then I think the instinct to come together to deal with these types of things, to deal with these pandemics that are at the heart of so many of our cultures, are very old knowing, our activist traditions from kitchen tables, marching in the streets, and ceremony. Isolation, being in isolation with COVID has asked us to do the opposite of our instincts and our training, to be socially distant, just as we were coming together around Wet'suwet'en, and I think that's really significant timing. We have, as we always do, an opportunity to shape public space, including virtual public space, and who can freely access it without fear of harm. I am really grateful actually to this group. I just learned this term, equity-seeking groups. Thank you. What a refreshing way of, instead of saying marginalized, always centering. Yeah, I love it. So anyways, I'll say equity-seeking groups have, of course, been much more adversely affected, as has been said already. And I did just learn from my colleague Lauren that City Council has finally decided to start data collection with racial and socioeconomic lens to interpret and respond to data to support equity-seeking groups. And so I think that's a really interesting change that has been thrust into the spotlight because of this current reality. And then lastly, I want to say that you know, during COVID and this current situation where public attention is being paid to white supremacy, racism, and police brutality, the idea of police as safety has been cracked wide open. Police were never designed to protect Black and Indigenous bodies or trans and queer bodies. They were designed to protect stolen land and private property. And I think we should read white women in that idea of private property. And so safety continues to be set up as something that you have to afford. We see it as the idea of a commodity, that you can buy a home security system. You can buy drink spiking, detecting nail polish and masks. And there's all this responsibility on the individual or the consumer to access those types of things. And it requires a lot of hypervigilance by the individual and individual blame if something does happen. That, of course, is missing the collective and community good at the heart of that lens. We're missing a lens on how these epidemics disproportionately affect equity-seeking groups. We're missing an opportunity to challenge the idea that safety is a scarce commodity and that can only be offered by state resources, which of course is not true. And again, I just want to give a shout out to my colleague Lauren, who said we shouldn't go back to normal. Normal was never good enough. People are wanting to go back to normal, and actually we have an opportunity to create meaningful change in public spaces. So thank you.
Thank you, Ariana. Ari, I'll pass it over to you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ari. I use they, them pronouns. I just wanted to start by thanking everybody. Really good to see you all again, the panelists, and also thanks to everybody who is participating and sitting in on the webinar tonight. So I'm a victim services worker at WAVAW. I was specifically brought on to work with the Inclusion Project, which was a big shift in our mandate to explicitly support transgender, diverse, and two-spirit folks. And I'm also a settler. I was born in Korea on Jeju-do and adopted transnationally and brought to these lands. I'm a survivor as well. So these are the sort of perspectives I'm coming from and also considering, as particularly right now, my responsibilities as a non-Black, non-Indigenous person of color. And what I was hoping to bring forward today is not only my own voice and the voices from folks I'm in community with, but also some of the things we're hearing from survivors at WAVAW throughout COVID. And some of the learnings and wisdom there, and really the things, you know, so many valuable things in regards to public space and safety for survivors, right? So I really want to honor that knowledge and try to bring it forward as much as possible. And then, Dahlia, to go to your question, which is a lengthy one, so I'm going to try to you know, answer it as best as I can. I think kind of echoing, you know, we serve a diversity of folks, right? And Stacey, kind of like what you were saying, what we did see and and what was maybe counterintuitive to me like during phase 1 of COVID when this all started happening, is that some folks were feeling safer, and these were undeniably like folks who had homes, had some sort of financial stability, were feeling like it was nice to have a reprieve from work or working from home or spend some time with family, children, roommates, however that might look. Which to me, it really raises the question, what does that say about public space when folks and work culture and how we socialize and all of those expectations, when folks are actually feeling some sense of relief from some of those things when they are in a stable and safe living situation, right? So I think there's a lot of questions that raises. But really, like I will say, probably the majority of the folks that, at least that I'm serving and am in community with, found COVID to become phase 1 of COVID to make things significantly less safe for them. And this is, and probably no surprise to folks here, but tended to be folks who are BIPOC, who are trans or gender diverse, who are doing sex work, who are using substances, who don't have homes or are living in dangerous situations at home, who are accessing services that suddenly shifted and had to adjust, right, to the reality of COVID. And there's so many examples of how that kind of looked, but what really struck me is that, in talking to folks, suddenly folks were, and these were folks who were, a lot of these folks were already accustomed to navigating safety, but with the add-on of considering, am I gonna be a part of, interacting community the way that I normally do to get the supports that I normally need? Is that gonna increase my risk of COVID, right? And these are also folks, many of whom are immunocompromised or have conditions that make it very dangerous for them to get, particularly dangerous to get COVID, right? So there was a lot of, I feel like a lot of exhaustion in navigating that for folks, and it's things like survivors who normally use substances. Like, do I risk using alone? We know the risk, like overdoses, is really high. Do I invite my friend over and potentially expose us both to COVID? Do I try to withdraw without any like medical support, or like how does that look, right? And just constantly having to try to do that. I know something that trans folks, for many trans folks, was a concern, was access to hormones and gender-affirming care during this time. And something that we know from listening to elders in trans community and frankly, mainly trans women of color, is that access to hormones is never a guaranteed thing. And it's also not something that the healthcare system sees as like essential, even though for folks it is essential healthcare, right? So there's a lot, tapped onto the uncertainty of COVID. Those kind of things were really coming up for folks, as well as I think, folks were expressing a lot of concerns over, particularly, and I don't know if folks remember sort of when it started, and there was a lot of sense of police and community surveillance, like if people saw people gathering on the street, they might call a bylaw officer or the cops, or be like, or accost them or assault them, like because it's unsafe for COVID, right? Without knowing the actual ways in which they had already decided that was a safer or a necessary situation for them, right? So I think, like some of those things have, like, and there's so many more examples, and I'm sure we'll get into more of them. When I think about, the second part of the question, just, opportunity going forward, I mean, I really see it also as sort of obligation going forward. But I think across the board from folks I've spoken to, there is a lot of, even for folks for whom phase 1 was super isolating and dangerous and difficult, there's a lot of concerns over reopening. And I think, just particularly because it seems to be done in a way, and there's a lot of anger around this when I speak to folks, particularly folks who are disabled or immunocompromised, like, it seems to be sort of indiscriminately opened in the service of the economy, not in service of folks who are actually desperately needing to access services and access their communities for safety. And I think, you know, what that says to me and you know, echoing other folks is that we really need to recenter going forward. We really need to recenter the voices of folks who are never safe in public spaces. You know, we need to recenter the voices of Black and Indigenous communities. We need to recenter the voices of sex workers, trans, genderqueer folks, disabled folks. And I think that, you know, even when you think about how reopening could have happened differently with some sort of equity lens, and I don't know if that's like the right word for it, but maybe it could have been a bit more discriminate how we reopened some things, like to reduce, you know, the overall exposure for folks who really, really need access to their communities and really need access to different things, right? So yeah, that's some of the things that I've been really thinking about and that I've been, you know, sort of really lucky to have shared with me by folks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ari. Amber, over to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Amber Goulet, and I'd like to say how grateful that I am to be with all of you this afternoon. I use she, her pronouns, and I come from Treaty 6 territory. Edmonton is where I grew up, and my mom comes from Musqueam, and my father comes from Cumberland House in northern Saskatchewan. And the voices that I'd like to amplify today, I'd like to honor my ancestors and all those who have come before me and ask them to come sit with us as we have these important discussions. As future ancestors, we are future ancestors. And so I think it's really important to remind ourselves that that's our job, is to remember all those that came before us, learn from everything that they had to teach us, and to bring those lessons forward is super important, especially in times of deep trouble like we are right now. When I think about public safety as something that has been greatly impacted, not just by COVID, but of recent things in the world, is that to echo what Ari said about negotiation of safety in public spaces, when it comes to our ability to think about what's the best way that I can keep safe. Sometimes those questions, you get to the bottom of the list, and it's unfortunate that we're not able to check off all those boxes, and we're having to say no to ourselves to essential things that we need to keep ourselves safe. So removing the community aspect to how we operate in the world is something that I don't think that we can move away from ever. I think that we need to work very hard and do our best work and strategies to bring our communities back together face to face. I don't think that being so far from each other is something that can last a long time. For myself, being from over the mountains, it was very hard for my family to have to hear that I was staying here. They were very concerned about being safe in a very large city away from home. And so I think reestablishing our connections to what our community is and where they are is super important. And I think that, you know, to echo some of the other voices, you know, it's amazing the technology that we have right now. We're all in our homes, or we're hopefully somewhere with some Wi-Fi connection, and we're able to sit and converse, but it's not the same. And I think that as powerful as public spaces can be, they can also be quite terrifying, especially, you know, to echo Priscilla and my brat, the COVID's just amplified everything that we experience on the day-to-day. So when I think about public safety, I really do think that we need to come up with some strategies to create more opportunities to check yes to more boxes than we're able to right now. And I think that doing that work together as a community is super important. And I think that we need to be including all voices at the table. And unfortunately, I don't think we're seeing a whole lot of that right now.
Thank you, Amber. Nicole.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be on this panel. Yeah, I'm learning, and I'm also just so blessed to be facing you all and listening from you, hearing from you. And so anyways, my name is Nicole. I go by she, her, hers. I am Luo. My people are from Kenya, I guess, and I was born in unceded Musqueam territory. I'm in Vancouver. I've been here my whole life. I am I have a podcast. I've had a radio show. I talk a lot, and I think one of the things that I always carry with me, and I'm going to bring to this panel, is just repping Black girls, repping Black femmes, repping Black women. I'm so blessed to have a matriarchy around me, and have been raised by sisters and moms, and so that's the spirit that I want to bring today, and just want to uplift our experiences that are a lot of the times really made marginalized, we always talk about marginalized communities, and I really want to assert that they're made marginalized with intention. And so, yeah, one of the things that I really have felt, and I spoke to when we had our little touch base with the crew last week, is I think for a lot of us who are from like equity seeking groups, who are visibly racialized, who are at the margins and made marginalized, a lot of our traumas and the things that we've been experiencing since Jump have been exposed for everybody to see. And for a lot of folks who weren't hip to that before, there's a lot of opportunity for folks to learn. And I think a lot of that learning is coming at a cost of our well-being, our emotional stability, our feeling safe in our bodies. I really want to center the fact that, we always talk about things like safe spaces, public safety, and then safer spaces. And for all of us, these conversations we've had them for forever. We've been talking about cultivating them because we've needed them so much. And so I think it's interesting to see how, while we're in this like moment of sort of like cultural consciousness awakening, folks who didn't know before are starting to realize that our safety isn't their safety, and safety isn't like a universal truth. And there's so many different definitions of safety, and our safety is pretty scarce. When it should be abundant, it should be limitless. It shouldn't be dependent on how much money we have or what we look like or that sort of thing. So, COVID's exacerbated the things that we've already been experiencing, walking down the street while Black, while Indigenous, while, a femme, all these things. And I think one of the opportunities that I'm seeing is for this sort of like mainstreaming of conversations like this, of talking about like, what is public safety? Like, these sort of previously fringe conversations that we were having as SJWs over here are now over here. And I think that's a great thing, but I also just always want to come back to ensuring that the learning isn't taking place on the backs of folks who are really facing so much harm every damn day. So yeah, I mean, I ask a lot of questions. Like I said, I'm really chatty. And so one of the things that I think we can expect moving into like phase 3 or whatever we're moving towards for COVID is sort of reconceptualizing safety, as folks have been saying, redefining what safety even is, having the folks that are the most marginalized at the center of how we even define safety, public safety, safer spaces, et cetera. And then asking questions like, safe for who? Safe from what? Who gets more safety? What makes them special? You know, who provides the safety? Is it safety or is it surveillance? Or is somebody commodifying safety? Is somebody co-opting safety? Like, I think these are the kinds of questions that we've all been talking about for forever, but I think the broader sort of public could really stand to benefit from discussing and exploring and digging deep and being uncomfortable in, because yeah, the truth of the matter is that like the safety that I experience is really dependent on how everybody else around me treats me. I can be safe in my own body, but what good will that do if I leave my house and I'm accosted by, you know, police? So, yeah.
What a beautiful segue. Thank you, Nicole. Because you're going to answer this question first as we reverse our order here. So you set yourself up really beautifully. So it really does feel like, and I think we've all kind of said this in the ways that everybody has answered into this rich fabric of what we need to be considering, but it feels like more than ever, we really need to be having discussions and interrogating what really keeps people safe. What keeps survivors safe, what keeps communities safe. And so from your perspective, your positionality, professionally, how do you see that we move forward and create a safer world? What does that world look like for you? And what strategies can you envision increasing safety for survivors?
So from my sort of position as a Black queer femme, I want to take the opportunity, of course, I'm going to say that, you know, the police certainly don't make me feel more safe. Police presence has never made me feel safe. So I would love for us to, as a society, begin to believe that as a fact, not as like a debating point. Because I think when we start to having to debate whether the people that are supposed to be protecting us are protecting us, we're just kind of like, well, we know the history of the police. We know what they were set up to do. We know the sort of continued legacy of, you know, capitalism and white supremacy and violence. And so, yeah, I just wanted to start off by saying that police don't keep me safe, and no amount of demilitarizing the police or, you know, community meet and greets or police being in schools or police in plain clothes will make police less lethal to Black and Indigenous folks. Safety for me comes from my community, and I just want to echo what Amber was saying, that like community has always been at the helm of just my sense of knowing who I am and knowing that I am protected, and that knowing who I can turn to when things aren't good. So, you know, those who love me, those who accept me, that's where I find safety. I think we need to be sort of like cultivating a new safety, like I was saying before. And to do that, we have to begin from a point of like care, I think, caring for each other across cultures, across our ethnicities, across our races, across like all the things that seem to sort of make us different from one another. You know, I think it's really tough to, I always say, like, I can't tell you to care about other people. Like, you got either just do or you don't. And hopefully with more information, folks care more. But I think that's at the root of why, you know, we're feeling a sense of unsafety, and especially with the police, is that they don't care about us. And so I think, I think that's a fact. So I think the notion that we are each other's business, that we need each other, that, you know, at the end of the day, I find myself relying mostly on other Black femmes who are so underprotected to protect me. Who's protecting us? You know, those are the kinds of things that I continue to struggle with, I guess. And I think I get at a loss for words, because I think about the degree to which so many of us are forced to continue on in isolation, when in actuality we really need other folks who don't look like us to care about our lives and our safeties. And we're begging people to believe that Indigenous lives and Black lives matter. And I'm speaking so much about the thing about, you know, police and safety, and not really talking specifically about survivors, because like we're all embedded in this sort of messy situation. We talk about police, we talk about how police don't really respond to the issue of sexualized violence. We know that as a fact. And so I think I'm going to stop there and let my other panelists, I can keep on talking.
Thank you. Amber, over to you.
To pick up right where Nicole left off, is that, yeah, we aren't, I don't think we've ever been really in a position where we can literally rebuild from something that isn't working. It doesn't take a genius to tell us that the current ways and systems that are in place, they had very specific intentions for the way that a lot of these systems were set up, and they are old. They are old and they are backwards. And to echo Ariana when she said, you know, we shouldn't go back to normal. Normal didn't work. So, you know, this work takes love. This work takes love, and it takes everybody. And we need to focus more on the root causes of our violence and our conflict, and amp up our accountability structures. Because I think that, you know, as happy as we would be all to sit here and talk and debate for hours about something that we all find super we have passion for, is that we have to start putting action into our words, getting up. Some of the solutions that came out of my research project as a practicum student with WAVAW this year was to create some strategies and some ideas on how to move forward from shifting the way we think about justice and safety. So shifting towards more of a transformative justice model really looks at the root causes of a lot of the issues that we're talking about, and it moves forward to educate those that need it. I mean, some of us, we live it and we breathe it, and we don't need someone to tell us how to handle these situations. We need everyone to come together. So, you know, always centering the survivor is key. Reconnecting and be relational with each other. I think that community building skills, I think just in our digital age, they can be really tough skills to be brave enough to go and learn. I think that we are very comfortable hiding behind our screens, even though we're in public spaces. I think that our anonymity is comforting, and I think that we need to come out from behind the screens, and we need to come and support. We need to support our community members, and that just goes from outside of what we call community. I think that learning to be an ally is super important and key. Yeah, and showing up is another big one. I mean, maybe, you know, that looks a little differently for some people, whether it's you're showing up in spirit, you're showing up online, you're showing up and you're sharing and you're educating people around you, or maybe it is that you go to that protest. I think that showing up and being adaptive is going to be super key in how we move forward in rebuilding a structure. Not using the same materials is going to be something that's super key for us. And I really do think that redefining what we think of safety, how we think, who is involved in that, what does that look like? I think that, to echo Nicole, I think that we have to be constantly asking all these questions, and until we run out of questions. I think that that's the space that we should get to, is that we run out of questions.
Awesome.
Sorry, I've just been writing down stuff you folks are saying. I really, really appreciate your words. And yeah, and so when I was thinking about this question and you know, centering BIPOC trans folks and gender diverse folks and two-spirit folks in this, I mean, it was, you know, we need to talk about the police, and I think, you know, really what I wanted to say, and thank you, Amber and Nicole, for sort of bringing up the history of these laws and this institution, right? We know that it's, you know, it was a violent colonial institution, and that's how it was designed and intended. And something I also want to say, just for folks who also might know, or folks, you know, non-Black, non-Indigenous folks in the trans community, these laws were also incredibly violently white supremacist and designed to protect, you know, white Christian heterosexuality, like forced heteronormativity. And we literally had laws across Turtle Island, these colonial laws that would literally criminalize the anti-cross-dressing laws that would literally criminalize any trans person who went outside, who wasn't wearing like 3 items of the appropriate gendered clothing, right? So we're thinking, and obviously, you know, these laws have shifted, sure, but when we think about who still bears the brunt of police violence in our communities, it's still Black and Indigenous trans folks, and quite often trans feminine or two-spirit folks, right? So I think, you know, and something I just wanted to say, you know, in regards to talking, speaking to survivors, and like I said, we work with survivors from a diversity of backgrounds. So we support folks who have always been navigating this kind of relationship with police, and we support folks for whom, you know, they were raised to believe and genuinely believe that the police was this institution that would protect them, that would serve them, that would help them get justice for sexual violence they experienced. And you know, over and over again, what I see when I'm supporting those folks is that a big part of their healing is actually like the deep realization that that this is not what the police will do for survivors, right? Even survivors who are situated in places where it's purportedly supposed to protect. And the reason that I bring that up is not because I think that folks, that those folks need to be centered in this conversation, but because so often I hear when people are talking, and people, you know, Black and Indigenous folks have been making really cogent and clear demands in regards to the police and prisons for so long, is that people bring up the, you know, what about the rapists question, or what, you know, like the police, all survivors need to be able to access the police, and that's what they want to do, and that's, you know, we need to keep them safe, we need to provide them justice. And increasingly across the board for folks that I work with, that's not the reality, right? So there's this misappropriation of what survivors are actually saying and have been saying for so long in the service of this, of maintaining this colonial structure and these colonial laws to function the way that they always have, when it's really not what survivors are saying, right? So I just wanted to bring that up as sort of a pushback to that that narrative around that, what about the rapists narrative, right? And that really hasn't been my experience being in community with a variety of different folks. It hasn't been my experience working with a variety of different survivors from diverse backgrounds. And so I think it's something that we really need to refuse because it's not even true, right? And it's used to justify, it's used against change, right? It's used to maintain sort of the structure as it is. And so, you know, in terms of, and I really appreciate, Amber and Nicole, both what you're saying as well about love and care for each other, and Nicole, what you're saying about being in each other's business, because being each other's business, because I think some of the most The things that I have seen that are really hopeful during COVID is just people doing exactly that. Like, I feel like I don't even know sort of all of the community initiatives that folks have just started doing, whether it's like getting produce for people, whether it's like actually redistributing wealth between people and like labor between people, or you know, like folks even with childcare and stuff like that. And this is stuff that communities have been doing for a long time anyhow, but I do think those seem really to be sort of proliferating right now. And I think that's what we need to be doing, and acting in support of folks, and caring for each other, right? And trans and queer communities have a long history of doing that as well when they aren't able to get care, don't have the same access to the system. And I think, again, centering the folks who are experiencing these kind of multiple violences and a lack of access to things, why it's so important, right? So, yeah.
Thanks, Ari. Ariana, over to you.
Thank you. All of this has me thinking about this quote that I recently heard from Angela Davis on Democracy Now! She said, "Safety safeguarded by violence is not really safety," which is kind of like a no-brainer the way she says it, but it really is something that we have sort of relied on instead of really thinking about genuine culture change. And when Amber said root causes, it reminded me of this time that I was on a mainstream news show on behalf of WAVAW, and they had myself and someone from a private securities company both talking about solutions to sexual violence. And I remember he was going on and on about how important it would be to change the lighting and add more surveillance. And he, you know, really like kind of putting me in my place, like, all right, little girl, these are concrete changes. And I just remember feeling so furious and willing myself to say the words root causes to get back on track. And we are so far past the idea of lighting and cameras being what safety is for us. We need genuine, real, deep culture change. And I'm really interested in this model of change that we're talking about. Actually, our director at SV Pro, the Sexual Violence Office at UBC, Alicia, really got me excited about this idea of 3 levels of prevention. The idea that we need to intervene before violence happens, gender-based violence, racial violence, any kind of harm. Before, we need to do things in the moment, and we need to do things after. And all of this needs to happen at the individual level. We need to see individual change. We need to see change in our relationships, within our communities, and within our institutions at our societal level. And so that first kind of primary level of prevention is examining our own biases, our own perspectives. How do we value each other? That leads directly to how we treat each other. What are we teaching people through our schools and our entertainment media and our news media? How can we be creating safer spaces that really take into account everybody's safety and isn't about upholding just, you know, let's change the lighting, but like truly talking with people about what safety will feel like. We've been doing a really exciting project with Good Night Out. Thank you, Stacey, for your amazing education. And there's a really influential student group that organizes a lot of parties and events on campus, and they've been really interested in hearing what Good Night Out has to say and changing their approach to things. We need to audit all of our institutions and our policies and our systems. Are they working? Who gets to make decisions? We need to look at our legal system, our reporting pathways, our healthcare, our access to supports, how we think about confidentiality, training and education and data collection. And we need to intervene in the moment. So in terms of like a secondary prevention, or in terms of like what we can do in the moment is like when you see day-to-day examples, the everyday racism, everyday misogyny, everyday transphobia, like how do we intervene in those everyday spaces? And then stay away from victim blaming. We need to understand trauma and believe survivors at the tertiary level. We need to move away from scarcity thinking and hypervigilance and the idea that we have to compete for safety. Move away from the idea of police as safety or police as authority. And I think there's so much amazing work being done in the community around creating pathways for collective and individual healing and justice that are alternatives of resolution models outside of our legal system that is punitive and criminalizing. This is very old knowing. This existed on this land since time immemorial with the Indigenous communities here, and we are bringing that back. We are learning that, and I'm just learning from my colleague Michelle at the investigation, what gets called the investigations office at UBC, about the really like customizable survivor-centered trauma-informed approach that you can have, where you have far more control over the outcomes than you would pursuing a traditional, disciplinary model. And as Ari was saying earlier, like survivors have been telling us for a long time. Certainly there are some who want to see those kinds of outcomes, but most people say that what they want is for the person or people to know that what they did was wrong, it wasn't okay, to never do it again to them or anybody else, and maybe even to apologize in a truly meaningful way, or to, leave them alone, just essentially respect their wishes. And so for it to be possible to have these other kinds of models is really, I think, exciting. Again, my colleague Lauren reminded me that solutions come from within communities. They're not dictated. There is no one size fits all. We create these models together. The Learning Center, the Federal and Provincial Coalition of Transition Houses, put out a document recently around COVID, and they've suggested, why not have a crisis line that could be set up for crisis intervention support and referrals for individuals at risk of causing harm. So certainly not taking away resources from survivors, but potentially adding resources for people who are concerned that they may need to be held accountable or avoid causing harm. I think that we are creative and capable beyond measure. And we have very old and very new ways of knowing. And it's just fear and fragility and entrenched ideas of normal that hold us back. And these are surmountable things.
Thanks, Ariana. Stacy?
Right. Whew. I'm gonna try to synthesize this answer. I echo pretty much everything that's been said. My short answer to this question would be, of course, defunding police, redistributing resources, and I really, really want to echo Nicole and Amber's. I love this work takes love. The idea of transformative justice and the work that equity-seeking communities have been doing for ages because they can't rely on the police, and I do want to really emphasize, I think that has a lot of value in terms of moving forward with addressing sexual assault and root causes in our community. I think that I am so happy of the work that's happening at UBC and seeing these young people learn new ways. Speaking from the Good Night Out hat, we always get people who just want to put up a poster that says no sexism, no creepiness, and we always say, like, definitely not. Let's not approach it that way, because if the average person sees a poster and it's like no racism, no sexism, no homophobia, it won't even really click with them, because the average person doesn't think that they're a racist. So having these kind of zero tolerance policies don't really work. But creating a group of a community who's able to call in how racism and how sexism and how sexual violence shows up in their community is so important. So I'm so happy about UBC. The other half of my answer is kind of, as all of us on this panel know, and likely lots of people watching, sexual violence and racism and all of our isms, they're deeply rooted in this white heteropatriarchy that's been in existence for a very long time. And so the problem of sexual violence is not going to go away anytime soon. Like, it didn't magically stop because COVID was here. However, to people outside of this reality, sexual violence and incidences of police violence and racism, it kind of becomes this water cooler topic that drifts in and out of being a buzzword. it's really not on our radar unless there's been a really public incident. And so what I want to add to the pot of ideas here is that what's really critical now and moving forward is to make the link between all of these issues. They're all interconnected, be it sexual violence, racial justice, reopening the economy, preventing violence against women and other marginalized genders. I want to try to help us undo this myopic vision that we only have the resources and the capacity to address one issue at a time. And when we're focused on those, the other issues just kind of don't exist. And to kind of tie this to an example, I'm thinking about the hospitality sector, which Good Night Out operates in a lot, and how the past few weeks as we've entered this phase of the economy reopening, they've been really focused on communicating that restaurants and pubs are now safe, and really trying to communicate that patrons can relax and come in and don't worry, your safety is our top priority. But then I think about how at the end of summer and into fall, there was a significant local movement of workers in those sectors who had experienced extreme sexual violence in the workplace, many of them being racialized workers. And many of them, there was a half day of speakers at City Hall talking about the sexual violence they experienced in these industries. And so I think about them having to now see their workplace and their employer exalt the idea of safety and really talk about how they're acting on it in this realm. And so I think that yeah, to kind of synthesize all of this is that I do really want to dismantle the single issue mentality when it comes to safety.
Awesome. Yes, we are complex beings. We can, as Vicki Reynolds says, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We must enact these things. Very important. Okay, Mabrat, over to you.
Okay, my goodness, friends, so much being raised, and with so much thoughtfulness and depth. I'm really quite honored to be here and to be hearing all of these comments. So in terms of, what are the ways to increase safety? Ariana, it's so true in terms of conversations around, we're going to talk about lighting, right? We're going to talk about, so I think operating in the downtown east side, that becomes a constant well, clearly we need housing, clearly we need, so you can go through the full list of all of the things, but it's always jarring to realize that for years and years and years, and I'm talking decades, that we're talking about absolutely basic, sorry, Dahlia, I almost dropped an F-bomb, but that we're always talking about absolutely basic and fundamental human rights and very fundamental basic health and safety elements. I'm struck by the fact that COVID, in a very bittersweet and I would say perverted way, actually opened up opportunities for service providers in the downtown east side and for some other of us service providers to actually put through services, programs, scaling up of existing programs, adding programs that we've all been begging for, fighting for, advocating for years, but now that a pandemic is hitting and affecting mainstream communities, suddenly, and this is how perverse it is, those things that we've moved the needles on, folks, is a 24/7 washroom trailer in the back lot of Wish. It is a 24/7 safe respite space. It is funding to extend our drop-in hours so that the bathrooms can be more accessible. Are you kidding me that it took a pandemic for funds to be released for things that are so fucking basic? So, we can continue to go through the list of we need this and we need this and we need this, but the reality of it is that those are all they're distractions. They're distractions from the fact that we need to, which is what everybody has been saying, if we centered the voices of those most impacted, and if we design cities, spaces, systems with the folks most impacted in mind and at the forefront, then the spaces, the systems will be safe for all, right? So the other things that are complete distractions at this time are fiddling with systems of law enforcement and talking about, well, we need to invest in body cams. We need to have more training for the cops. We need to invest in more bias-free training for the cops, delivered by the cops, by the way. And how perverse is it for us to talk about body cams, which the whole point of is to now just film the thing they were going to do anyway, really? And if everything we're doing is to try to address we're trying to address harms that we know these systems are going to cause, and we're looking for band-aid solutions. So I think many of us have been involved in these conversations for decades, some of us individually and some of us organizationally, that we've come to the table in good faith. We've participated in processes in good faith. We've been part of consultations. We've been we've been in roundtables. We've participated in studies. So these are all still just tweaking and fiddling with a system that's ultimately not broken, but a system that is designed to uphold white supremacy, and a system that's designed to uphold colonial structures. So we're at the point of, we've done all those things. We've tried all of those things. And I think many community members would say, we've done it. What more proof do you need? What more evidence do you need? And Nicole, your comments about that our truths are now laid so bare that, I don't know about all of you, but for me, watching the news is viscerally painful. Like, this is not theory, this is our lives. And if we're waiting for people to realize that this shit has been going on and that this is what's been experienced by so many people, and if we're waiting for people to learn that is a deadly irresponsibility. There isn't any time left. You know what I mean? That, do you need more evidence? Do you need more roundtables? Do you need more consultations? No, we're so beyond that. It's painful. And I mean, I can't say it any other way than deadly irresponsible. So we need to be rethinking what public safety means. We need to be rethinking what is the role of law enforcement in public safety. Why are we continuing to expect law enforcement to deliver really, really critical services that they do not know how to do and should not be doing? I keep thinking about, so Ari, you were talking about reporting. I mean, we see the same thing. We collect bad date reports at WISH and from all of our partners. One thing that has stayed consistent is that 8 out of 10 of the bad date reports that come in, sex workers do not want to report to the police. 8 out of 10. And some of these are really, really violent bad dates that include kidnappings, detentions, rapes. And the concern is to warn other sex workers, but certainly not to report to police or engage with police around something incredibly violent that's happened to a sex worker. I keep thinking about, and I know that some of you will feel the same rage every time that we see public service messages of women are reminded not to walk alone at night in this and this neighborhood because such and such assault happened. Why are we not having mass public safety warnings that are, men, cis men, please do not rape. You are reminded not to assault other people in your neighborhoods. Cis men, you are reminded not to kidnap and rob and rape women. So in terms of several of you all mentioning a culture shift, that's the shift. That's the shift. Like, when it no longer becomes tolerable at all, it's just not an option to rape. It's not an option for gendered violence. It becomes something so abhorrent to the general public that's when we'll see the shift. So putting bandages on, well, if there was more lighting here, then she'd be safer. No, she won't. It'll be in a darker alley now. That's what's going to happen. It'll be in a car now. So I mean, we're done, right? People are exhausted. I know for me, I'm personally finding myself needing to cocoon and find safe spaces within other activist communities. I'm hitting that moment. I'll be completely honest, but I'm hitting that moment where I only really want to talk to other BIPOC folks, and I only ever want to talk to people who are already there, because it is exhausting and we don't have time. We're out of time.
Thanks, Mabrat. And just a reminder that those activist communities are sacred communities, and that violence also happens in those communities. Ariana and I were just reminiscing about the Occupy Wall Street, where we were going down and plastering the art gallery with "Please don't rape your fellow comrade." Like, people just need to, recognize that those places are sacred, and that violence can happen too at the intersection. So, Priscilla, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mabrat. It is definitely exhausting. And I hear you about just wanting to be in spaces where people understand and people have lived experience and people can just say, I'm with you. Like, to feel that right now is just, with so many intersections that are happening, it's almost like your brain wants to explode, because you're like, not only am I a woman, not only am I Indigenous, not only am I this or that or this, and they all come together and you're just like, please, come on, right? And so what keeps people safe? I find that people are talking a lot about like these colonial systems of places that can keep you safe. Some people have mentioned here today the other idea of that it's community, it's family, it's that sense of belonging that also keeps us safe. And I feel like as an Indigenous woman who's been through traditional ceremony, that's something that's very important to me, that keeps us safe, that can keep you sober, that can keep you connected to family, that can keep you grounded, and it can keep you in a sense of identity that can feel lost sometimes when you're navigating the systems. And we use that as a tool to be able to help people who need the guidance. Like you said, someone who wants a phone line to say, hey, you know what, I may be an offender. Like, I'm worried about myself and what I may do to other people. Like, for us, there's certain ceremonies that we do culturally that will help people be able to navigate where they're at in their own wellness. And many of our ceremonies have been canceled and postponed and lost during COVID because we're not able to gather. And so for me, that's a huge loss for our community. And it's something that's not talked about enough, is that people are talking about Indigenous funding, but it's also about the economics of it, right? So for us to do ceremony, there's a give and take of food and money and transportation that isn't also being given. So when we're talking about what resources are being given to people in Indigenous communities, that's one of the things that we've lost, that's not a lot of people even know that has existed. So that sense of wellness and culture connection, so that's what keeps us safe. How could we build on that moving forward? I think that it goes back to a lot of what everyone else has said. I'll echo that. It's dismantling that patriarchy. It's dismantling like the white supremacy, and it's the capitalism that's attached to everything, and the colonialism that's attached to everything, and bringing in, like, how do we do that and then create safer spaces? It's in that recovery plan, this economic recovery plan that the provincial government has, that they're going to hopefully disperse some of those funds in places where it's needed, to the people who need it the most, right? Like you said, Mabrat, having a 24-hour place where you can go and use the toilet and wash your hands is common sense. So keep that going. Don't just say, oh, well, COVID slowed down now, we don't need to give you as much, right? Taking a look at the safety of sex workers, the safety of people, like all these gray areas that have started to pop up where people are like, oh, we didn't think about that, they need to have that. Put the funding into these spaces and into these places. Take a look at the people are talking about support your local business, right? Well, take a look at your local BIPOC businesses. Take a look at all these amazing First Nations artists that we have out there who are also suffering because they're not able to financially, you know, put themselves out there at markets, being able to go to these conventions and have tables. You know, powwows also have been postponed. And so that's where a lot of our people go to be able to put food on their table. So now we have all of these economic losses. And yes, again, where are we going to go and get the money from? Right? So we're going to use all these survival mechanisms that we have learned historically from being oppressed. And now what are we going to do to start to rebuild ourselves? So I think if the government was to put money into these places and into like the pockets of the people who need it the most, that's where we're going to start to see some more equity. And I feel like some of that is also not being addressed because I don't even know if they know like what it means when a powwow is postponed, like what that does for us on a holistic level, not let alone economically, right? So yeah.
Thank you, Priscilla. You've done a beautiful job at segueing as well, because you're gonna speak to this again first. This is our last question that's gonna wrap us. So if we're to think about COVID as this moment in time where there have been pauses for some folks, there was certainly a pause in the economy at first. There was requests to hold, to shelter in place, to abide by rules. What lessons can we take from what we've seen phase one or the immediate onset of the rules and regulations that came along with COVID? And what do we want to take those lessons and apply them for moving forward, for the dream of what's possible as we move forward?
I think if anything, there are two things I would really hope that people would get out of this. And it's about the racism and the sexism that comes with people's responses to COVID. I think it's interesting that there was another panel I was a part of here in the Tri-Cities. We were just talking about final thoughts. And one of them was, someone is asking about microaggressions. And I'm like, think about when you're walking through the grocery store during this COVID time and somebody coughs, you know, and that physical reaction that people have, and, you know, how people are reacting towards you when you're walking down the wrong way in these aisled lanes. For us, you know, I can't speak for everybody, but at least for myself as an Indigenous woman, that has been a feeling of being in community for so long. I'm feeling like I'm walking down the wrong aisle. I'm feeling like people are looking at me the wrong way. And so I just hope that people will take that experience and recognize that these reactions, these triggers that you're feeling, and how that is how a lot of us have lived our lives. And the other is about that, my personal space. So many people are like, stay 2 feet away. This is my personal space. Stay out of my bubble. And like, this is my body. I have a right to own it. Wear a mask, not wear a mask, whatever. But thinking about that as a woman and what it is for people to or, you know, in our bodies, and what it is to tell us how to be in our bodies and how to keep our bodies safe, and what that looks like. Like, I feel like there's so much community policing around now our bodies and what we do, that hopefully people will connect those two and really see that how unfair it is to have someone else tell you how to be in community, and take that away as a lesson to be better people, is what I'm hoping. Yes.
Well said. Thank you. Mabrat.
Yeah, just be better people. Just be better. So for this question, I really do think quite a bit about the fact that I'll use the downtown east side as a context, that with at least 3 pre-existing crises within the downtown east side pre-COVID of homelessness, poverty, and an opioid crisis. And then add to that years of stigma, years of trauma, and the ongoing over-surveillance and over-criminalization of an entire neighborhood. And a neighborhood that I have to say where over 60% are Indigenous, when Indigenous folks make up 2 to 3% of the overall population. Are you kidding me? Why are we not talking about this beyond the downtown east side? So what I'm very struck by is, will people notice that the impacts that mainstream communities are facing as a result of COVID for things like loss of income, but then there's the readiness and the availability of income replacement that mainstream communities are able to access without risk, harm, and barriers, whereas the communities we support and represent are constantly in cycles of poverty, and there is no mass rallying, national level pandemic rallying around income replacements in urgent crisis pandemic type response. So I'm struck by the difference of how we're rallying together, how quickly systems shifted, how quickly funders shifted. Suddenly trillions, billions, millions of dollars are being made available. And I was struck by how many politicians, including those on the more right end of the spectrum, were actually talking with socialist principles, right? Of that what you do affects everybody, so all for one, one for all, and that these politicians were now talking about the responsibility of what you do is affecting everybody else, so please behave, be better people, right? Suddenly, this understanding that if individual households, if individual families, if their economic structures fail, that the community fails. And so there was a rapid response around making sure that doesn't happen. Well, why was that not the same consideration for communities that are dealing with that consistently? And if the federal government can understand that such a massive rapid response is what's necessary to shore up, support, and keep communities together, why wouldn't they do that for the communities that we're all fighting with and for? So I wonder, will people retain some of the messages of what does it feel like to now not be sure where your next paycheck is going to come from, to not know whether you're going to lose your home, and then as a result, will I lose my kids? Will I be able to take care of my kids? Will I lose my house? All of those types of things. And then even experiencing, maybe for the first time for most people, going to stores and not being able to get basic supplies. And for most people in mainstream, let's say this region, that's never been a thing that people have had to worry about on a daily basis, let alone constantly. Will we think about these things? Will we think about the fact that, you know, if all of us, if even one of us is falling behind or falling through cracks, we're all falling through the cracks? Of course, my cynical perspective is that people are itching to just get back to normal in all senses of that word. And but you know, we've seen some pretty miraculous things happen as a result of full-scale rapid response to a pandemic that I wish this is what all of us in the downtown east side and in many other activist spaces have been talking about for years. So now they've just shown us it's possible. It's absolutely possible. So now political will to put pressure on making sure that happens. And then secondly, for racialized folks, again, like these realities have been laid bare. I don't know how much more evidence is necessary. Do you believe us now? Will you do the same level of mass restructuring and dismantling of systems to address inequality and inequity?
Thank you, Mabrat. Stacy, over to you.
Good organizing on the order, because my answer was going to open exactly where Mabrat has left off around. I have many takeaways. The first being how swift a response can be deployed when there is momentum behind it. It's not lost on me that May had the highest rate of overdose deaths since this public health crisis was announced, and last Friday marked the highest rates of calls to 911 for first responders. And so that shows that when there is political will, we can deploy resources. I think from a consent angle, the pandemic has shown me that the public understands consent and negotiation and maintaining a comfortable distance and reading people's body language. We've been able to actively employ that while moving in public space for the past few months. We understand that we are capable of giving up maybe something we really want to do because it will protect others. These are all foundational, the understandings of consent and autonomy, and we've shown that we can step up as communities and practice those skills with each other, with total strangers. I think in looking at the reopening and the requirements for places to be open right now, and the 2 meters of distance and clear queuing of customers, those are things that accessibility advocates have wanted forever. So it's shown that we can create spaces where there is room for people to comfortably get into and out of. Another takeaway I have is that unfortunately, without government support, some nonprofits that do support survivors or sexual violence prevention work are not going to survive this pandemic. They're not going to be able to keep their doors open. And so an emerging need would be non-repayable grants to restart services in a way that is safe. And also access to unrestricted funds. I don't think that Good Night Out is alone in being an organization that has funding for a very specific service model delivery. And so calling on the powers that be to reduce those barriers and give organizations the autonomy to respond to emerging community needs rather than tie us up in bureaucracy of paperwork is absolutely essential. One of the more inspirational aspects that I want to find ways to maintain or give longevity to or build into my practice are the informal support networks that have emerged. This has been mentioned a few times. The informal acts of community care, such as mutual aid, creative fundraising for particularly impacted communities, such as the trans community or sex workers, virtual supervised consumption opportunities for people who use drugs. Those are all really creative acts of care that are rooted in community, and I don't want them to go away. And then I do also think that have really given us insight into what universal basic income will provide for us. And that through all this, the need for universal childcare, the rollout of more paid sick days for workers, they're all essential to survivors, and they're essential to gender equity, and they are a critical piece to ending gender-based violence, and this pandemic has shown that. Thank you.
Thanks, Stacey. I just want to echo the piece around unrestricted funds and being able to be creative to center the voices of people that need the services, that cookie cutter approaches to the ways that survivors need healing and justice after sexual violence is not a thing. And yeah, organizations that work directly with folks need to be able to be trusted to be creative and dream about what makes the most sense. So thank you for that. Okay, Ariana.
Thanks. Honestly, I think one of the biggest lessons from this is, for me, Mabrat and Nicole saying, "Do you believe us now?" What an unbelievably powerful reminder that we must believe survivors, that we must believe the equity-seeking groups, that we must believe communities. and frontline workers. And this whole situation, I think, really highlights the ways that racism and white supremacy and other intersections of oppression allow for a societal tolerance of harm and blame. The way we value people really impacts the way that we believe they deserve. It impacts what we believe they deserve, what they deserve to have access to, how they deserve to be treated, and what we believe they're responsible for, if we feel we're responsible for them. And this is such an opportunity for us to question all of this. Like, we know that the most effective approach to any social issue is through collective and community healing, a collective and community approach. Again, I'm just going back to Angela Davis. I really loved this, her way of saying, I want us to see feminism not only as addressing issues of gender, but rather as a methodological approach of understanding the intersectionality of struggle. We need to fight all of the injustices all of the time. As much as we are made to compete, we are not in competition. I was reminded by my Black and Indigenous colleagues about resisting divide and conquer and scarcity tactics, like as if we are only capable of caring about one issue at a time. We're not capable of seeing their connections. And we just cannot continue to believe that there's not enough, that there's not enough care, there's not enough love, there's not enough support, there's not enough attention, there's not enough safety. These are renewable resources. There was an Indigenous elder at WAVAW years ago when I was there who used to remind us about the true abundance. I think somebody else said abundance today, the true abundance that this earth has, and that will stick with me forever. So thank you, and so much gratitude for everybody for the panel today.
Sorry, I lost my mouse there for a second. Yeah, I think, thank you everyone for all that. I was busily writing again. But yeah, I just really think, you know, what COVID and it's really highlighted, like in terms of sexual violence and survivors, it really highlights what so many folks already know and have been saying, is that sexual violence is never just sexual violence, right? It's sexual violence, and you're a trans youth and you've been kicked out of your home and the shelter's not safe. It's sexual violence and you're a sex worker and the police don't believe that your body is one that can be assaulted, right? Like all of these intersections that are sort of coming up now, more broadly, even though folks have been saying it, you know, for so many years. And I think really, again, and I know I said that earlier, but just the obligation to center folks that are most experiencing these multiple violences. And an example, I just wanted to mention quickly an example I mentioned to the panel briefly that I wanted to talk about, which was, you know, an example of why this is so important, and also speaks to Ariana, you know, talking about divide and conquer, and just thinking about community generally, but with the, you know, sort of the COVID related rise of anti-Asian racist actions everywhere, and sort of the VPD response to that, which was, you know, sort of come into the fold, we'll protect you, we'll, like, please come forward with these, we don't tolerate hate crimes in the city, and, you know, all of this kind of thing. And what does it mean to accept that or give that legitimacy when you know that the VPD is simultaneously, you know, directly violent towards Black and Indigenous folks and many other folks every day, right? And so I think really it just underscores the importance of whose voices we're really honoring and letting guide us going forward, and how we act in support of those things. And, you know, and also, like, you know, Ariana, thanks for also mentioning, or I'm not sure who mentioned accessibility advocates who have also, you know, been saying, hey, we've laid this blueprint for how so many of these structures should work years ago, like, you know, so long ago. Can we be involved in this conversation now? Because, you know, like our knowledge and also our access to things needs to be honored, right? And so, yeah, and so I really just think going forward that really, and kind of connectedly, I mean, super connectedly. Those are the kind of things, you know, when we support, you know, again, the clear and cogent calls to defund the police and stuff like that, we actually simultaneously create spaces which survivors have been asking for, which are another way of seeking some sort of justice, seeking some sort of accountability for folks, and seeking some sort of healing, because a lot of folks are, again, they're not, you know, I just spoke to somebody today who's, I don't want the perpetrator to be incarcerated. I just want to feel safe and make sure that this person understands what was wrong and doesn't do it again, you know? So I think just, you know, when the task feels overwhelming, I'm also, but I mean, Brad, I'm also cynical, but when I'm feeling hopeful, it's seeing that these things impact each other, can also impact each other positively when we start to really honor people's voices and so much knowledge, right? So that, thank you to everybody so much for everything that was said today.
Thanks, Mari. Amber?
Yeah, I would like to thank everybody. I feel so connected to everybody. Then I just feel so much joy being with everybody. One thing that I've learned most from this pandemic is it's so simple. Is pausing and slowing down. I don't know how many times that I talk to, you know, close family and colleagues that, you know, talk to me about feeling exhausted. And it's no wonder we're living in a very fast-paced world where we don't have time to sit and look inward, to question ourselves and be really self-reflexive and ask myself, why am I feeling this way? Why is this triggering me? Like, be really dedicate some time to get to know yourself and have some self-discovery, because I think that coming from a place where you fully understand yourself, I think then you can kind of understand other things. So moving away from that sort of neoliberal individualism and moving towards a collective is super important, because we're constantly teaching and learning from each other. There's so many things that I've written down that I'm super excited about, and we can't do that alone. I also will echo my brats on that. One size doesn't fit all. I think that there's a strategic sort of push to push for standards and you know, a general sort of guideline for the population. I just don't think that's working. I really don't. I think that everybody comes to the table with gifts. Everyone comes to the table with baggage. And I just don't think that a one size standardized way of moving forward is something that's going to work. And I think that it's this pandemic's been terrifying. There's been so much ups and downs, but I really do think it's been a gift that we can sit back and look and really hear each other, because you know, the world doesn't happen in a vacuum. And right now, everything is just so big because we're not operating in the way that we would normally operate. Our routines are shaken. The way we think about things is shaken. And I think this is the perfect time to make big changes. I feel super positive and rejuvenated that through really big, uncomfortable change, amazing thing comes out of that. I think being uncomfortable is a space where we all need to be right now. And that we need to hold each other up and make sure that we don't get too tired, we don't get too exhausted, that we as a collective can hold each other up so that we can continue to do this work. And I just want to say thank you so much for the invitation, and I've had such a great time.
Thanks so much, Amber. Priscilla? Oh no, sorry.
It is I.
It's Nicole. Wow. I the corner of the screen. No, Nicole. It's not you.
One more again, Priscilla. Go ahead. Say it again.
Let's start with questions.
Priscilla, your face is like, I want to echo and just like express gratitude to everyone who you guys are, you all are just energizing me and making me feel so validated. And Priscilla, like you were saying, there's something so important in being in spaces with people who already get it, because, you know, I think Toni Morrison was the one who said, like, what racism does is it exhausts you. You're starting to prove to people that these things are happening. And so we know this is happening. We know that our communities are vulnerable, made vulnerable. We know that our communities are made marginalized. We know that Indigenous women and femmes are the most underprotected. We know that Black women and femmes and girls are the most underprotected. So we know these are facts. We're not debating them anymore. In the same way that we're not debating that COVID-19 can kill people. Like, they're facts that we take, and we're not going to be going backwards trying to, like, convince people that we are worthy of living a life free of violence. And so echoing what other folks were saying, just and specifically about what you were saying about how it's fascinating that governments are able to deploy resources, and it's all hands on deck, and it's top down and it's bottom up, and we all need to be, you know, thinking about each other's well-being, and we're all in this together. And I think we've proven to ourselves and each other that we're able to, as Vicki Reynolds says, chew gum and walk. We can hold all the pieces at the same time. And so I think what that really requires and demands of us is to keep on having expectations of one another, of our governments, of the people that are supposed to be ensuring that we are able to live lives free of violence. You know, my expectations have been growing. I'm like, oh, y'all, you can see that this is happening. You can see our pain is visible and laid bare. Like, okay, so now what? Like, as Abrat was saying, like, thank you for funding, you know, Wish's 24-hour bathrooms. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Like, we need this. We need more of this. We need just more signs that we deserve dignity. And I think one of the things that I have been really trying to hold on to is the fact that we're worthy. COVID has showed us that all of our lives are worth living, and our government has showed us, okay, like, we're trying to keep our folks alive. And so that means that they care about us. So I think just walking in that truth that as survivors, our truths are worth being taken seriously. Our experiences of violence are worth being taken seriously, and we're no longer going to, and we have not been, but we will continue to not tolerate folks thinking otherwise. It's not up for debate. We're not trying to convince folks. If we and I think I staunchly believe that there are always going to be folks that don't want to take this stuff seriously. And I'm not talking to them anyways. I'm talking to the folks that are already wanting to dig in and do that sort of, as, you know, masked folks and cis men, like, having those conversations with themselves and their friends, like, these kinds of, you know, who's perpetrating violence. If we know who those people are, we don't need any more studies. Y'all just need to do the work. Like, you know, we've been talking about this since, like I said, since Jump, and it's time for us to, we need to keep on continuing to have our shits taken seriously, because we're real people. We're here, we're worthy of living, and we're trying to not just survive, we're trying to thrive. We're trying to restore our Indigenous communities to a place where they're able to, like, thrive. And I think we're so far from that right now, and that's what my eye is on, that prize. So I thank you so much, everyone, for your just brilliance. I'm so grateful, and if anyone's taken notes, I would love them.
Thank you all so much. I do have other questions, but we'll save those for another time. So I will say to everyone watching that you will receive a survey. If you want to hear the rest of the questions, if you want to bring this panel back together, let us know. And yeah, I mean, I don't get a lot of opportunities to sit back and learn from the amazing brilliance of my community and folks so often these days. And I was saying, as people were entering the webinar, that energetically for me, also as an extrovert, I really need to be in spaces with folks. I will say that, like, goosebumps multiple times throughout this conversation. So thank you for also replenishing me and being part of my community and WAVAW's community, and all of your insight and what you brought to this conversation was beautiful, so vital and important in this time. And echoing, you know, what Nicole just said, like dignity, value, choosing our path, choosing what matters to us, and not having those choices be determined to say whether what we've experienced is real or not, but just to be seen as legitimate, and that having autonomy over our choices is at the center of what are the ways to move forward. So thank you all. We actually, I don't know, this is like a real, we made it, 7 o'clock, 1 minute past. That is, I usually go at least 20 minutes over time. So really, like, we've knocked this out of the park on multiple factors here. This has been recorded, so yes, share your notes, and also we will make this available for folks if they would like to rewatch it again. Thank you all so much. Priscilla, would you like to close us out and send us off into our evening? The sun has come out where I am.
I was going to say, it's not as bright here as it is there. Yes, I do just want to say, you know, as Amber said, you know, we are hoping to have the ancestors here and really bless us in this event that we're hosting, and have the conversation flow as good as it did. So I do just want to thank everyone for being here, and remind everyone to have some self-care, because we are opening up a lot when we're having these conversations. It is a part of that emotional exhaustion, is that we keep opening it and closing it, opening it and closing it. And so just be mindful to take that self-care, be mindful to talk to who you need to. Like Dahlia said, there is some resources available, and please take care of each other, you know, so eat well, sleep well, live well as you can, and just, you know, be in the spaces that you need to be, that has you feeling as safe and as warm as you can, in what ways that you need them. We, you know, like, wellness is so different for all of us, and so just be mindful of that moving forward, and seek the support that you need. And you know, I just do thank the ancestors for being here with us, and hopefully staying with each and every one of us who is here, and all of the loved ones that, you know, that are lost and hurting and who need that support. And just know that, you know, we're sending out those good prayers and that energy to everyone who needs that. Yeah, Hachika.
Thank you. And we will certainly, I know folks have been asking in the chat where they'll be able to connect with folks. So what we will do in the next day is collect everyone's information and make that public about where you can either follow folks on social media or connect with them via email. Okay, well, thank you all so much, and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you.
WAVAW. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Stay safe.